Kevin Hunter in studio with Sue Kuehl Pederson. She is running for the Senate in Legislative District 19. And thank you for joining me here in studio, Sue.
Thank you, Kevin. Good to be here.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. So let's talk about your background a little bit, first of all, and then we'll get into why you're running for office. But share with people like where you come from and some of your passion for running for office.
Okay. I grew up in Skamania County, which is next door to Legislative District 19. And my dad worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I grew up at a salmon hatchery.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up going to school in Bellingham to Western Washington, got my biology degree. And I ended up doing a lot of fish research work, particularly fish passage studies at dams along our Columbia and Snake Rivers. I also became a harvest manager for the State Department of Fisheries, and for a short time I was the harvest manager for Puget Sound non-tribal commercial fishing, which would be purse seine and gillnet boats.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also was a habitat fisheries manager for many years. I went back to school 25 years after earning my bachelor's degree. I got my master's in public administration from the University of Washington Daniel Evans School.
Mm-hmm. Learned
a lot about governance and how to run a big organization.
I want to stop you there for a minute because
okay.
I want to make sure, I want to ask you why you decided to go back to school, because some people make that decision to go to school later in life, and other people out there who may actually be facing similar kinds of situations, perhaps that you were at that point, might be looking at college again and saying, is it too late? You decided to go back to school after 25 years. What was your reason for that?
It's never too late.
Mm-hmm.
It's really great to get your brain going again. I was a single mother at the time, and I wanted more options for moving up in my career.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up learning about the energy industry, working at public utilities, and eventually I became the power manager at Grays Harbor PUD, where I retired 9 years ago from that job.
Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to run for the Washington State Senate?
Well, I have two grown children. They're in their early 20s. They're more or less launched, although some people say they're never launched.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had time on my hands. My second husband, I retired with him when I left the Grays Harbor PUD, and we had 3 wonderful years together, but then he unexpectedly passed away. So I got through his estate and my grieving, and my children have been off on their own. And I just realized I still have a lot to give. I want to share my background, my energy, my time, my experience with the public. I want to help people and help make our government more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about jobs and economy, because it's a big concern for people here throughout the district. I relocated here back into Washington myself a couple of years ago, and one of the things that I've really been struck by, specifically in Kuehl County, you may be seeing this also district-wide, but there are some real concerns when it comes to jobs and what's happening in the economy. And for many people, we're looking back 10, 20, even 30 years where it's been relatively flat for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the economy and jobs, and any solutions or ideas you have there?
Well, I have the advantage of remembering how it was when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
When we had a thriving timber industry, life seemed pretty good back then. People could go out and buy a car now and then. They could do maintenance on their homes. We had a lot of strong communities in the Southwest Washington area. As time has passed, I see our economy doing a long, slow downhill slide is how it feels to me. I think you're right, it's been stagnant for decades.
Mm-hmm.
The spotted owl decision with the Endangered Species Act was quite heavy-handed in this area. Using hindsight, looking back, I think there were a lot of things we could have done differently. I think that we ended up sacrificing jobs for environmental goals. And I would love to see us rethink how we do that, how we factor in people and livelihoods when we look at environmental protections. I think we can come up with better solutions.
So one of the things I want you to respond to, because I have interviewed a lot of business guests over the years that when I've been involved in broadcasting, and interestingly enough, when I have asked my business guests who have had a larger business influence, so I'm talking about more than just a micro business or a small mom and pop business, but they've had a larger influence, and in some cases have had business operations in multi-states. And I've asked them, what do you see as the number one obstacle to your success in business, other than themselves or the limits of their own ideas? And most people might think that business people would say taxes, but they don't. They say regulations. What do you think about that?
Well, I see the two as being very interrelated, because the reason you have the taxes is to pay for all the people who impose the regulations. So I've been out talking to businesses in our district, and I would agree the main complaint among all the businesses I've talked to is too much regulation. Businesses feel like they're throttled by all these requirements they have to fulfill before they even get to do whatever it is they're trying to do in their business. And I've had people tell me, a small shop in Aberdeen told me they had hired someone to help them in their shop, and the reporting requirements were so involved, they ended up just saying, we can't manage this. We're just going to get rid of our employee and try to get by with our family. And that's job killing. There have been other businesses that said, we have to report to Illinois Department of Revenue, IRS. There's all these layers where they could just make it easier by combining those reports to one report for all agencies that need it. It's a lot of duplication of effort, and it's ridiculous. But I do think that we have too many regulations. We need to lessen government overreach, reduce taxes, and I think those two are hand in hand. And I think eventually that would create more jobs in the private sector. People would feel less daunted by trying to start a business and figuring out how to jump through all the hoops. I think we need to make it simpler for people to just create a business.
One of the startling things, Sue, that I learned not long ago is where this region rates relative to the state of Washington. Then you even look at a larger area, but how we rate relative to health of our individuals in this area. And you had made a comment to me one time even about the longevity of people here. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit more, because I see some real issues in the long run around our health care and around health-related issues in this district. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. I've seen statistics that show our expected lifespan here in our district, 19th Legislative District, is lower than anywhere in the state. There's one county over in might be Lincoln County, over in the eastern side, southeastern side, that is also rather low, but it's a definite concern. I'm aware that we have a lot of drug use among young people, and we have mental health issues. We have seniors that need better care. But I am going to circle back to jobs. Practically every issue we are trying to solve relates to our joblessness. Our district has about twice the unemployment of Seattle, King County, twice.
I believe it.
So when we don't have jobs, it creates all these other problems: homelessness, depression, drug use. People need a purpose in life, and there are lots of ways you can get that, but one way is a job. Jobs give people an identity, it gives them self-worth, and a reason to get up in the morning. I think once you create jobs and you get your economy kick-started again, then you have revenues from your taxes, hopefully with less regulation. You'll still collect some taxes, but you'll get more taxes just because your economy is better. You know, it'll be related to the abundance that you're creating. Then you can do a better job helping people be healthy, helping them, they'll probably be able to afford healthier food if they have a good job. It's a cycle that's so related to having jobs, having a good economy.
I couldn't agree more. I think a thriving economy is an answer to a whole host of issues. And when I think about people who get involved in drugs and broken families, et cetera, there's so many things that happen as a result of the economy struggling. So
it's heartbreaking.
A very key issue.
I've been doorbelling. I've met people who are just heartbroken because of heroin use in their families or joblessness, not being able to, afford simple things that they need. It's very basic, and we have to do something. It's gone on long enough.
Some short time back, I want to talk about energy, because some short time back there was a lot of conversation in local social media, and in this area we have a lot of news sites that are out on social media that talk about these things, and there were huge concerns around energy. And one of the videos that you did some time back is on Initiative I-937.
Yes.
And I want you to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's interesting. This goes back into when we were talking about regulations and environmentalism, that sort of thing. There's a lot of reasons why we do things we do in any state, but Initiative 937 has some elements, and I want you to talk about and how that ties into energy and rising costs of energy. So go ahead.
Well, I-937 was an act to, I think it's called the Energy Independence Act. It was aimed at making our state less dependent on fossil fuels and that sort of thing. The thing is, though, Washington has never been very dependent on fossil fuels. We have a few gas combustion turbines that are hooked into our grid, but mainly our source of power is hydropower at our dams. And the initiative specified that all the utilities in Washington State would have to bring more renewable energy into their portfolios at different junctures in time. So the first one specified 3% renewable by 2009, 9% by 2016, and 15% renewable by 2020. I believe those are the numbers. Well, then it also specified that hydropower was not considered renewable under that bill, that initiative. So all the utilities in Washington have been building wind farms, because wind and solar were basically and conservation were the means to get to the targets. The thing is, wind, I knew this from my work in the energy industry, wind is a difficult source to manage because it just blows unpredictably. You don't know when it will blow, it's intermittent.
Isn't there a range of wind speed that has to be accomplished?
Right.
That has to be above it in order for it to even work, and below a given number as well?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And also, it's highly maintenance driven. The wind turbines are not very reliable. They're, relatively new technology. So we built a lot of wind turbines, and many of them are out of service for much of the time.
Is that the reason when you drive by some of these wind farms, you see so many of them stop?
Yes.
It's actually a maintenance issue?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, if we had a way, and we don't yet, but I hope a lot of people are working on this, if we had a way to store energy in large quantities and economically, you can use batteries, but they're environmentally damaging in the long run. So people are working on ways to store a lot of energy cleanly and economically. Then wind power would be more useful. But as it is, wind power can be used by shutting off hydropower and making the dams go on and off a lot, which is not really that good for managing the rivers.
Sure.
For fish passage or navigation or flood control or the other uses that we have for hydro. So it's a difficult plan. The other thing I want to say is the reason hydropower was excluded in the first place was because of concerns for fish trying to pass over hydropower dams. Well, my experience as a fish biologist, having studied that since the mid-70s, the Army Corps of Engineers and Bonneville Power Administration have been studying fish at dams since the early 70s, and they've made retrofits. They've made passage much easier for fish, adult fish going upstream and juvenile fish going downstream. And as a result, the impacts at the dams has been decreasing over time, steadily, slowly but steadily decreasing. So if I were voted in as senator, I would try to modify the I-937 requirements and make hydropower, at least a portion of hydropower, considered renewable. And that would bring your power bills down because you wouldn't have to rely on wind as the wind and solar. We don't have much solar. You wouldn't have to rely on those as the only renewable energy you could.
I have a quick question then. When you mention your background as a fish biologist and the fact that fish were part of the considerations of I-937.
Yes.
So are the dams actually a major problem as it represents to fish now today, or is there in fact something else? And the reason why I'm saying something else is a year ago I made a trip out to Astoria and I'd heard all these stories about sea lions.
Yeah.
And I read reports that it was either 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see a couple hundred of these sea lions there. And I shot video footage of the sea lions there. There were thousands, when I mean at least a couple of thousand there. And then just not long ago, I was there again, and not only were the equal numbers on the docks that I had videoed last year, but also the rocks and the docks north of there were all covered with sea lions. I have no idea how many were there, but I would have guessed somewhere in that neighborhood of between 2,000 and 4,000 sea lions just in Astoria, and I've heard they're all over up the river as well. What real impact are they having on salmon if, in fact, I-937 passed because of salmon concerns?
I like how you circled around to the dams again. Well, here's the thing about salmon. They're very, and this is one thing I love about salmon, is their incredibly complicated life history. So they spawn upstream, they go down to the ocean, swim around in the ocean a few years and come back to the same stream. So that means at any point along that path over, say, 3 to 5 years for most species of salmon, anything can happen. They can be harvested by fishermen up in Canada or Alaska or Japan even. They can, run into sea lions, say, out in the ocean or in the river. The trouble with the sea lions, as I see it, I like to think of things holistically in terms of a big picture view. And what I see is we have an Endangered Species Act that focuses species by species and excludes human beings, Homo sapiens, and it just focuses on restoring this species, restoring that species. With the sea lions, they were protected for a time. Now they're no longer protected, but the males, apparently the California sea lion males, have been coming up to the Columbia River because they find some good fish to eat up here. And so they have been coming in greater and greater numbers. The orca whales normally feed on sea lions, but they are low in numbers. The federal government is trying to increase orca whale numbers, but it hasn't happened. So now you've got population dynamics out of whack. You've got too many not enough orca whales, too many sea lions who are feeding on our salmon, leaving fewer salmon to go up over the dams to their spawning sites, and fewer salmon for fishermen, either sport or commercial fishermen, to fish for. So it's out of balance, and I see it as sort of a challenge for different agencies to work together to bring things into balance so that we're not just feeding a bunch of sea lions. Nothing against sea lions, but we have probably too many up here feasting on our salmon runs.
Well, I asked the question because if I-937 was so important to pass, and with the passage of that, we took hydropower out of the renewable energy source because of its impact on salmon.
Right.
If that was such a big deal to do, then why aren't we doing something about sea lions? What would be one of the solutions that you might implement with regard to sea lions?
Well, I would, NOAA Fisheries, a federal agency, has allowed some killing of sea lions at Bonneville Dam, which is the lowest dam on the river. But it's only like 100 per year. And we have, like you say, I think the estimates are nearly 10,000 sea lions up here, whereas we used to have about 2 before this phenomenon occurred. So I would recommend killing more sea lions until their numbers are balanced with our numbers. Now, I do know that it's mostly males who come up here. We need to allow enough males to go down to California for breeding time, but I think there's got to be other solutions. And I'm willing to talk to biologists for their ideas, but we really need to protect our fisheries, especially if we're paying higher power rates because people think the dams are killing the fish, when actually the sea lions are having a lot of damage to our fish runs.
Well, it just
it's
made
a
sense to me.
complicated picture.
Yeah, it just made sense to me if we were so interested in salmon preservation with I-937 and we took a huge economic hit to do that. Why aren't we doing something about the sea lions now?
I would definitely do something. I would be talking to the federal agencies that manage sea lions and come up with a plan. And it's not just sea lions, it's birds. Terns and cormorants are taking a large number of the juvenile fish as they go out to the ocean.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
So as long as we're on this subject, I'd like to take a minute to talk about our hatcheries.
Sure.
I grew up at a salmon hatchery, so I know a long history of what's been going on at our hatcheries through my dad and just growing up and knowing a lot of biologists. We have made a really strong and almost artificial distinction between hatchery fish and wild fish, in my mind. Hatchery fish over maybe 5 or 6 decades were managed in such a way, and I won't go into it here, but they decreased the gene pool of hatchery fish basically by just taking a subsample of each returning run and taking the eggs and sperm from a smaller number of the individuals returning. So if they had taken a little bit of eggs and sperm from each fish that came back to the hatchery, the gene pool would have been preserved. But instead they just took it from a small number, relatively small number. So over time, the gene pool of that hatchery was limited because of this practice. Well, they discovered in the late 80s probably that was the case, and since then they've been trying very hard to manage wild fish more aggressively and hatchery fish less. In my view, they're all the same fish. They all started from the same place, and the reason you even have hatchery fish is because they didn't build fish passage on Bonneville Dam when it was completed in 1930s. So for 10 years there was absolutely no way for a fish to get up over Bonneville Dam. So they built hatcheries, mitigation hatcheries they called them, and that's where our hatchery fish started. Well, they're actually the same fish as the ones that are still in the river. And also I would add that Salmon are incredibly resilient and adaptive. Salmon in nature will go to a different stream if their home stream is blocked or damaged or something. They'll find another stream. They're not that picky. And they don't need to be so critically managed to keep the separate gene pool from the hatchery gene pool. In my view, they're the same fish. We should be making more hatchery fish and putting some of those in the river and bringing some wild fish into the hatchery. We should be mixing them up, and that would increase the gene pool on both the hatchery and the wild fish and create more fish out in the river and in the ocean. I don't know why it's like we've artificially reduced the runs because we got hung up on this gene pool problem. I think it's time to let go of that and just start. And there's really not much genetic difference between the two, hatchery and wild fish.
Sure. I'm going to close with giving you an opportunity to talk about differentiation between you and Taco, who currently sits in the position. He's been in Washington politics for a long, long time. You know me well enough to know I'm not an establishment person. I think that nobody ever should make politics a career, and that it's always good to have fresh views and fresh voices there. So what difference do you offer the citizens of Washington that you think Taco does not?
Thank you for asking me that question. So first of all, just the fact that we get to vote is a choice. People get a choice. Senator Taco was not opposed right up to the time of filing for this race, and I saw that and I thought, I'll give the people a choice. I'll just jump in and I will offer my background and my energy, my fresh ideas. I think Senator Taco, he was a county assessor for 30-some years. Then he was appointed to the House in 2004, I believe. He was in the House for 11 years, and then last year he was appointed to the Senate. So in my view, I would say he has never actually had to run for the legislature without already being an incumbent, because he was always appointed. So right off the bat, that gives him a little bit of an advantage. But he has been basically a bureaucrat his entire career. First at the county assessor's office, then in the State House of Representatives, now in the Senate. And I think what happens to anyone, I'm not picking on him, I think anyone who is kind of in the same environment, the same kind of business, you might say, you just tend to start thinking kind of in a routine way about what your job is. And I have changed jobs enough times, partly because my research jobs would just end, and partly because I was curious about learning something else. I have been in such a variety of jobs that I feel I have a very broad background to offer. I also have worked in federal, state, county, and city levels of government, and along with my master's degree program, I understand how organizations differ and how they work best at different levels of organization. I feel pretty skilled at analyzing problems within an organization and trying to solve them in a creative way. I like to think outside the box. And one of my favorite quotes is Albert Einstein, who said something like this: you can't solve a significant problem using the same kind of thinking that created the problem in the first place. So I think what I offer is just a real open-minded, creative approach to looking at where we are, defining our problems, which we often don't do. We just jump in and try to solve something without really figuring out what is the problem we're trying to solve. And then, analyzing solutions, collaborating with a lot of people who are involved, coming up with an agreeable solution, and always trying to reduce government, reduce taxes, And that's what I would offer to the voters of this district.
So something I want to give you some feedback on, Sue, when we first met after I heard that you were running, one of the comments that you made, either in our conversations we had, but you were sharing with voters that you care about the people that are here, and it had a lot to do with why you decided to run. And with the conversations that we've had, with the things that I have come to learn about you and a little bit of your background, I can honestly say there are very few people who actually do care about the citizens that are here. But I actually believe you. I actually believe you.
I hate to hear that.
Yes, there's so many people.
True.
Yeah, there are so many people running for public office these days, and they don't care.
I totally care about these people, and when I doorbell, I care even more. It's so wonderful to meet people face to face and hear them in their own words telling me what is happening in their lives and what they need help with. It's very, very humbling to me.
Well, I think a nicer person hasn't run for the Senate in Legislative District 19. And I also love the ideas and the fresh energy that you bring as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks
well,
so much.
thanks for joining me here in studio. For those of you in our listening audience, you can find Sue online at citizensforsue.org, and make sure you visit that. Again, Kevin Hunter here with Sue Kuehl Pederson.
Thanks for joining us.